We are only 2 weeks away from Pravin Gordhan's budget speech, and I am now joined in studio by Billy Joubert, Director of Tax at Deloitte, to preview some of the implications that could come out of the speech for corporate tax. Thank you so much, Billy, for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Before we delve into corporate tax, let's look at new taxes. What are you expecting this time around?
Well, we're not expecting to see nominal tax rates go up, and we'd hope to see that individual tax rates will be adjusted to compensate for inflation. But I think we do have to be aware of a picture of individuals and companies being subjected to new forms of compulsory charge, which may not be necessarily a tax formally, something like the mineral royalty or these new toll fees that are going to be payable around Gauteng, but which represent an additional charge for access to basic infrastructure or a resource, and therefore are a significant burden both for companies and individuals.
We just spoke about the mining in Durban. You mentioned minerals and petroleum royalty as well. Do you think that that is going to be expanded further?
I think it's more a case of embedding it. It's a fairly new system. There have been certain teething problems. So I think that it's pretty much established in terms of policy. It's not a tax, it's a payment for the right to exploit mineral resources. And I think this whole debate around nationalisation, one has to bear in mind that, of course, the actual resources themselves are now owned by the state, and mining companies pay the state for the right to exploit those resources. But there have been certain practicalities in terms of how to bed it down, and I think that's probably what we'll see.
Something that's also been relatively new is carbon emissions tax as well. And again, are you expecting this to be further embedded?
Well, it's, as you say, it is new. It's only been in for a few months. It's possible that it might be extended to other types of vehicle. It's also part of a wider picture of trying to create a greener environment, and so we'll also be looking for incentives for companies to operate in a greener and more fuel efficient way. But of course it does represent, like the toll fees, an additional charge on people to use the roads or to use motor vehicles.
National health insurance, something that many of the investor community are hoping not to see coming to the fore, but it could be a reality in South Africa. It has been on the top of the agenda. We know that various papers have been written on this. Are you expecting to hear word on this this time around as well?
Well, my colleague Kay Walsh this morning was saying that we'll be looking for the President's State of the Nation speech later this week. There might be some guidance there. It's probably still too early for there to be significant detail in the actual budget for this year. It might be big news for next year. But at this stage, it's still at a fairly conceptual stage of development.
On the corporate income tax side of things, as you mentioned, no real changes expected there, but you are going to be looking at the implementation of withholding tax on dividends as well, and that's going to have an implication.
Yes, it's basically the abolition of STC, which has now been, we've been waiting for it for several years actually, and its replacement by the withholding tax on dividends. That has required the renegotiation of some double tax agreements, and that's taken longer than I think the government initially expected. It's quite an investor-friendly thing because withholding tax on dividends is a more internationally acceptable and recognisable way of taxing dividends. So we would be looking to see what is the timing in terms of when we're likely to do that transition.
Let's look at individual tax. You mentioned the new toll fees that are going to come to the fore, and that's just something on the periphery as well. But what are you expecting on the individual tax side of things?
We're not expecting to see any changes to the tax rates. We have been seeing adjustments to the brackets to compensate for inflation and avoid bracket creep, and hopefully those will continue. So we're not expecting anything particularly dramatic. I think the main thing has been more on the administrative side, that individuals, for example, have been able to submit their tax returns electronically, and we're moving towards pre-populated tax returns, where what you get will be pretty much 70, 80, 90% of what will actually be in your tax return, and that's from SARS gathering all the information from other sources. So we'll expect to see that continue.
And SARS has been doing a great job in collecting taxes as well. Is our tax pool increasing?
Yes, I think so. The SARS has broadened the tax base by bringing new taxpayers into the net. For example, through the amnesties, the small business tax amnesty. We've now got the voluntary disclosure program on the table right now, which enables even corporates or individuals to regularise their tax affairs if there's something they're feeling uneasy about. So I think SARS has done a lot, both from a systems point of view and from an administration point of view, to broaden the tax base, and that is all to the good.
And the international tax side of things, you're also expecting some movement there?
Yes, one of the biggest trends for South African-based companies is moving into Africa, and there are certain challenges there because of the fact that African countries often impose withholding taxes on payments back to South Africa. So there's been some indication that Revenue will try and assist us by, for example, changing our domestic laws to make it easier to claim credits.